the suffering children of Karamoja, and the famine is certain to get worse. So desperate has the plight of the children become that 3 weeks ago Save the Children Fund appealed for nurses to run feeding centres in Karamoja. TVI followed the first team to Uganda, where Guy Blessed, Save the Children Fund's man on the spot, delivered last-minute warnings on the hazards ahead.
Don't get involved in arguments with the security forces at roadblocks, even though they may be obstreperous and rude. You're almost certainly going to see some fairly unpleasant sights up there of human suffering, and I'm afraid to say probably of human behaviour as well. You're going to a difficult situation and you'll see people at their worst.
And so 36 hours after arriving in Uganda, the team joins the dangerous famine convoy route to the north, to their destinations in deepest Karamoja. 150 miles from Kampala, and the convoy is safely off the road in Umbali by nightfall. At the last proper town on the famine route, Paula Ward from Derby and the rest of the team stock up on fresh vegetables to improve their own diet in Karamoja. Only the team's good health guarantees the operation for Denise Moore, an Australian in Britain, and Diana Lacy from Chichester.
And what is this? £2.50.
For the whole team, it's a first confrontation with an economy in ruins, where paper money is virtually worthless.
Washing soap, 20. What about your toothpaste? That's 40. 40? Wow. What about airline? 30.
Toilet soap at £3 a bar, a tube of toothpaste at £2.75.
Everything's a bar.
The interior of Karamoja. It was along this bush road that United Nations convoys were shot up earlier in the summer, and Save the Children had one of its own employees shot dead. At 23, Anne Caldwell from Huntingdon is the youngest of the team. How worried is she about the undertaking?
I'm worried about the sights I will see, because I've never ever been in this sort of situation before, so I have no comprehension apart from what I see on the television.
Does that worry you, the thought of actually having to live in a very unstable country?
Yes, it does. But there are people here that need help as well, so I'm prepared to come in and help them. And hopefully there will be no political uprisings while we're here.
The East African Famine Appeal has raised a record £5.5 million from the British public. Part of Save the Children's share is being spent on paying, equipping and supplying their nurses and doctors in Karamoja. Their objective to help a warrior people, not just overlooked by our own civilization, but also despised by most Ugandans. Even the barbaric Idi Amin decreed that the Karamojong should be clothed. Since Amin fell, the troubles of this backward region have multiplied. In the shambles of the new Uganda, their needs have been considered least of all. In their own language, Karamojong means skeleton people. Skeleton-like from centuries of semi-nomadic existence, cows that provide everything from milk and blood to drink to clothes to wear. Yet in many parts of Karamoja, cattle are now a tragically rare sight, as herds are rustled over the international border by heavily armed gangs of raiders. Once inside Karamoja, the nurses head for their final remote destinations via Moroto, the township that passes for a regional capital. In a land of poor communications, no telephone, no radio even, the final leg of the journey takes them over Uganda's very worst roads. Across fords where the Land Rover must tow the supply lorry, even if the tow rope does snap on occasions. According to local missionaries, more than 1,200 people have died from hunger in the Abeam area alone over the past 4 months. This Save the Children Fund feeding centre is one of the few lifelines for the rest of a hungry population. And the centre would have closed if there had not been more volunteers from Britain, like Diana Lacy and Anne Caldwell. For Diana, first contact with the appalling malnutrition to which Africa itself has provided the name, kwashiorkor, literally the disease which one child gets when the next one is born. And the condition is often complicated by worms and by the dehydration that accompanies severe diarrhea.
26.8. 4 times a day.
But before Diana and Anne can get to grips with clinical problems, there are a few more basic ropes to learn, as volunteer Mark Farrant demonstrates.
I think the first thing you've got to pick up is the local parlance. So in the morning, you say dichu, and then if somebody says dichu to you, you say dichu aber, which means I'm very well. And then in the afternoon, you say irio, and they say irio aber back. And then, when they all rush to the door or to the food, you shout mot, which means slow down, and then they all turn around and say slow down to everybody else.
But Anne and Diana have come to an area where security poses a much bigger problem than the control of children in the food lines.
It's just the kids' food.
Sunday morning at the local mission church, and despite the soldier in the congregation, things are far from good in the parish, and for the Italian missionary who runs it. Father Gabriel Durigon rides a motorcycle because he knows a car would be stolen. He's been attacked and stripped by raiders, and described to me the latest outrage when relief food was stolen and one of the nuns beaten up.
Well, she went to the store, and when she got out, she was surrounded by the people.
Wanting food?
Yeah, wanting food, and they started beating her and pulling off the veil from her and these kind of things. Fortunately, there was a good man around her who covered her, protected her by putting his hands over her, and she could escape.
Worst of all, Uganda's own security forces cannot be trusted. They too are on the lookout for food. They are accused by missionaries and relief workers of conducting a murderous campaign against the Karamoja. Among the atrocities of the last 6 months is the murder of 6 patients at Abeam Hospital in April, the murder of 3 more at nearby Morulem in May, the killing of 2 locals by the army in Moroto, and last month, the burning of 2 villages, in which at least 9 died. During our stay in Karamoja, we were handed the draft of a damaging report on security, addressed to Uganda's new military government. And the report must have made particularly uncomfortable reading for members of the military commission in Kampala, because among the causes of insecurity, the report details bad elements within the Uganda security forces. It accuses government militiamen of indiscriminate killing, and the only answer, the report says, is for a more disciplined control over Uganda's own armed forces. Do you see anything happening to improve the situation?
Who can improve the situation at this moment? I really don't know. I really don't know.
No real chance of improvement at all, you think?
From within the country, I am very pessimistic. I hope I am. I hope I am. Because, you know, to speak of law and order, first of all, people who are supposed to maintain law and order should know what it means. So I have had too many incidents in which those who are supposed to protect the people are instead exploiting them.
From a beam, it's a drive still deeper into Karamoja, to Kaabong, at present the worst of all the famine areas. In what was once a government orphanage, Save the Children Fund is running a feeding centre for more than 1,000 children. 200 of them are real orphans. The others must be accompanied by a parent, because Save the Children doesn't want to create more orphans. And to keep tabs on them all, they insist that every child should wear a bracelet. Andrew Timpson is in charge of the centre.
Andrew, can you tell me what this little boy wants?
Well, he needs a bracelet, in fact, so he can be fed. But we're going to have to turn him away because he is not that emaciated. And I'm afraid we have to run a rather cruel system here that we can only take the kids in a fairly severe condition. Any kid with a reasonable amount of flesh on its bottom and on its arms, I'm afraid we have to turn away.
How many are you having to turn away from this centre then?
Well, today, for instance, we had 10 children and 10 mothers, and I only took in 5 mothers and 5 children. Now, this kid will leave the centre. Now, he might come back, say, in a week's time, looking a lot worse, and we take him in. It sounds rather crazy, but we can't feed everybody, I'm afraid.
With experience of a Bangladesh famine behind her, Paula Ward's responsibilities will be at this rudimentary health centre, where keeping the children on the premises is one of the problems.
Bad diarrhoea, you sit them in one place and say stay there so that you can get extra fluid into them. They'll run off, they'll come back 2 hours later, they're having had nothing to drink and dehydrated, and then you've got to start putting IVs up and all this lot. So we told them yesterday, if they're prepared to stay here, then okay, we would treat them. But they've got to stay here. And I think the only way to do it is tell them if they run off and they're not here when they should be here, then we cut all the bracelets off, which means we'll get no treatment, no food, nothing.
Paula is soon at work in the health centre's feeding compound with a little child called Losillo. 2 children in the family are already dead.
Paul, is that a simple milk mixture that you're giving the child?
This is, yes. I've tried him with the porridge and meat, but I just can't take it. So now we're just trying him with plain milk. It's difficult for him to swallow.
Apart from terrible malnutrition, what else is wrong with that child?
His eyes, very infected. He's very weak and he's very anemic as well.
How would his eyes have got infected like that?
Well, I'm not really sure how these have got infected. But we can use tetracycline on them, so they say that it'll be cured very quickly.
You could clear that up?
Yes, yes. With the right treatment, you know. But you've got to depend on people bringing them in so that you can treat them.
Paula, from what you've seen over the last 24 hours in Kaabong, how does this compare with your experiences in Bangladesh?
Well, I thought Bangladesh was bad, but looking around here and in the short time what I've seen, this is far worse.
In terms of numbers?
Numbers and malnutrition and all these infections. I mean, I have seen really healthy far more than I expected, you know.
30 miles away, Denise Moore, the Australian, took one look at this government dispensary and decided it should be reopened. The place was cleaned out and a few villagers alerted. The result was a scrum.
We might try this one, no? Can you come?
As well as the terrible malnutrition, Denise starts dealing with the tropical ulcers and the sores. All the other infections in the village have gone untreated while the dispensary was closed. The simplicity of the team's drugs would shame a British clinic, but basic health problems demand basic remedies. After the ointment, antibiotics to check the infection. And Denise has no doubt that she'll be kept hard at work during her 6 months in Karamoja.
I can see many long hours in the clinic, yes. I think we'll have to start early and the numbers won't diminish at sunset, I don't think. And you tell her to bring him back tomorrow. And we will look at his eye again.
Outside in the villages, a longer-term tragedy is brewing. For a once proud and independent people, successive drought and crop failure are promoting a vicious circle of death and dependence. In the village of Lope, defended against outsiders by thorn trees, the local policeman, Matthew Pido, describes tragedies that have already befallen his people.
7 adults have died, and I don't know the number of these young children.
But many children have died?
So many, about 11 have had. About 11 have died.
That's a third of the village children dead from famine already. Last week, this pot of sorghum was all that had been harvested to feed a family of 7 for 6 months. It would make just one decent meal. Father Anthony Labraca is the local parish priest.
Starting from next month, I think that if the agencies which have been helping up to now do not help, we shall have hundreds and thousands of Karamojan dying because of famine.
So to avoid that sort of situation, the international agencies have got to, increase their assistance?
Alas, yes. Although, talking in terms of educating people, we should have a long talk about decreasing this kind of helps.
Mothers receiving their daily ration of uncooked maize at the Save the Children feeding centre at Kaabong. At the worst of the famine last month, the United Nations was responsible for feeding 150,000 Karamojong, almost half the population. When the harvest is exhausted, the UN says they'll be feeding 120,000, a third of the people. But agencies in the field, including Save the Children, fear that this could be a terrible underestimate. They believe that far more will need emergency feeding and that famine deaths will be widespread unless there's a change of heart. Either way, it seems, the Karamojong are destined to become more dependent on outsiders, beggars to the Western world. Should the world then continue giving out food as charity in Karamoja?
Not at all. I would suggest that this would be really the end of the little dignity our Karamojong still remain with. It should be given with a certain cooperation. I'm glad to hear now that they are proposing this food for work. Although I know it may be not successful, but it is one way which I would very much support. Our people are already depending too much with the spirit of dependence, of beggarism, from institutions, church, white ones, as they say. And I think that if we continue deluding them by showing them that it may go on for years, they will certainly depend much more.
The children, of course, have got to be fed, haven't they? Handouts.
Children are innocent. And you see, our Karamojong may use their children in these situations as a catching, hook. So, of course, we can't fall into the trap, get moving because of the children, helping also the adults if they do not deserve.
The children, though, as Father Anthony says, are innocent. And it was the children that nurses Anne Caldwell and Diana Lacy came to help. They're now settling into the daily routine of running a feeding centre for the starving and expecting even greater numbers in the months to come. Anne Caldwell's first morning duty is the supervision of the mothers and children who queue for milk. Anne has already learnt that a lot of supervision is essential.
There's the occasional mother who will eat the child's food instead of giving it to the child, and you've really got to make sure that every spoonful of food goes down the little one's throats, otherwise some of them never see it. And the fact that the mothers are often so uncaring about their little ones is very, very sad.
Diana Lacy gives the children in her care their weekly weigh-in to chart progress from emaciation to restored health. Progress measured against a special wall chart. Back in Kaabong, the condition of the child with the eye infection has worsened. He's now being fed on an intravenous drip. Paula Ward's daily famine routine gets off to a harrowing start.
I arrived at 6:30. I go around all the children, and one child had died. We still carry on and sort out the feeds for all the rest of them, put this child onto one side. Later on, one of the boys from the house comes down with a vehicle, and we take the child to the cemetery.
And the child is buried very promptly?
Very quickly, yes.
Do you know anything about that particular child? How old was it, a boy or a girl?
It was a boy, about 7. A rather big one. But they seem to die very quickly, the big ones, which is surprising. It's mainly, I used to think it always used to be the very small ones, but it is the bigger ones. It's very dehydrated.
And severely malnourished?
Yes, yes.
But if there were death certificates in this country, what would he actually have died of?
I suppose malnutrition and anemia. It seems to be the main thing here.